What is going on, guys? Welcome back to our MMA show. Ryan Moody here, Jimmy Smith. Real quick, I want to say thank you, and I know Jimmy does too, but I'll just run through the list. Obviously, a lot of people are concerned about why we're not on iTunes. iTunes is coming. It's a procedure to get involved with them. I had to publish an episode first. We went on Podbean. So for those of you in America or the US, Canada, Australia, Finland, Sri Lanka, the United Kingdom, Hong Kong that listen to our show over the past couple days, I deeply appreciate it. I never expected that type of global impact right away. Secondarily, for the people that subscribe to the show on Podbean already, which would be DW6WT6WZYGCYL, and then the easiest one, Red Kobe Bean. I had to look at it a couple times, but I pieced it together. We definitely appreciate everything that you guys are doing for us. And again, we know it's going to be an uphill battle, and we know that you have a lot of choices when it comes to MMA podcasts and podcasting in general. So I know that I appreciate you guys taking opportunity to spend time with us and listening to our opinions. I assume you're going to agree with all that, Jimmy.
100,000%. 100,000%. Great stuff, man.
With that, the topic of today would be UFC Philadelphia card, Gaethje Barboza. First time back in nearly 8 years. You know, I guess one of the things I want to mention off the bat here, to me, being from this area, the push to New York, into New York, has really limited the New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Maryland, kind of Virginia cards. It seems like all of a sudden New York is really content with just kind of migrating around New York rather than push events back to the Mid-Atlantic. That said, since we just did the Rushmore show, you didn't watch that, you can go check it out, be the episode before this one. If you go back and look at the prior UFC event here, you want to talk about an event that was just marred by injuries. I think they had like 8 injuries to alter that card. But a Facebook prelim that featured Johnny Hendricks, Mike Brown, and Rafael Natal. The Spike prelims, Alexander Gustafsson beats Matt Hamill. Chad Mendez, who was actually at the event last night, beat Ronnie Jason. And then the main card highlighted by Evans, Ortiz, Belfort. Rory McDonald making his second fight in the U.S. I thought that was interesting to go back and look at a card that was kind of panned. But 8 years ago, man, there's still some heavy hitters there and still some people that fight. I mean, we're going to look forward to this year's fighting with McDonald and Gustafsson. So it is interesting to see that even though the sport has grown a lot, you can still go back and look at those cards and say, wow, that was a pretty big deal.
Not only was it to me in front of a great audience for Philadelphia, it was also the kind of card. And the way I see cards like this, UFC on ESPN2, this is the card you want off of. Not in a negative way. This is like a mid-level card. Outside of the main event, there weren't a lot of contenders on it. It's show me you deserve to be on the next level card. Show me you deserve to be up in that contender status. Show me that water cooler moment that's going to elevate you. To me, that's what a card like this is all about. When you look at the actual matchups, and we had a couple people, I think, do that.
Well, to me, this was go for Justin Gaethje. I know his nickname is the highlight, but honestly,
Jesus,
he should consider changing it to just Justin. You were going to get your money's worth for this ticket, Gaethje. I had a friend
Great
go
stuff
with me, and I try to explain Justin Gaethje to someone that really doesn't follow MMA. Right? I'm like, well, Justin Gaethje, you know, Division I All-American, great wrestler. Oh, great, he's a wrestler, so I'm going to see like grappling. Well, no, because he's got really good leg kicks too. Oh, great, so he's a striker, so I'm going to watch like kickboxing. Well, no, he's actually a really good power puncher too, and he's not afraid to stand and trade. It defies what we think fighters should be. And for that point, I will say this is interesting. He listened to our first podcast, and he was amazed that in our Rushmore, we did not have Bruce Lee. Yeah, I mean, I don't think of Bruce Lee as a fighter per se, but I guess I don't often think of him as being a major force in mixed martial arts, but I guess as an inspiration to many, he probably steered a lot of people into it.
I have, by the way, there's a little teaser here. If for those who are interested, I've talked a little bit about a history project I've been working on. It's almost ready to go. It'll be out next month. And we deal with Bruce Lee. That's our first episode. And one of the interesting things is, and I actually talked to the author of his 2018 biography, a man named Matthew Polly. Outstanding interview. I'm going to start a podcast, and that's going to be on there. Anyway, That's a little teaser. That's a little hint. Interesting when you actually study and read about Bruce Lee. He's obviously a fascinating subject. The problem I would have is that there was a regression after Bruce Lee died, where we went back to the nobody touches the master type philosophy of martial arts, where we didn't have to show what we had. We didn't have to get out there and prove it. You didn't question the master and all that dumb shit. People claiming they could knock you out with their chi. That was a big part of the 80s. Real competitive martial arts, our mixed martial arts as we know it, didn't happen until 20 years after Bruce Lee died. So the idea that Bruce Lee was a forerunner of mixed martial arts, yeah, but if he was, you would imagine it would have happened a little bit earlier, a little bit sooner. There was a big regression and step back after Bruce Lee died. Would Bruce Lee have loved mixed martial arts? More than likely he would have. He didn't like sport competition. He didn't like anything that wasn't the street. If you read anything about his life or his teaching philosophy, it was all about the street. It was all about practical self-defense. That's great stuff. But he didn't like the kind of sport things other people did. The only actual with the judge sporting type fighting he did was a boxing competition in Hong Kong. It was like a lot, that's been blown up a lot. People said he was a boxing champion. He won basically like an interscholastic competition. He beat 2 guys. Okay. That was the only time he ever fought with referees and judges and timekeepers. And part of what MMA is can you do it with a judge, a timekeeper, and a crowd of screaming fans? If you can't, shut up and go back to your dojo. To me, that's what MMA is. So including anyone who hasn't fought in mixed martial arts, I have heard a million gym stories. I have heard a million, this guy beat up this guy in in the back of an alley or in a gym that nobody heard of. If it didn't have a timekeeper, a referee, and fans, I'm not interested. I'm not interested in the story about the one time you got in a fight somewhere or what this guy can do in a dojo. MMA eliminated all of that. So to me, to be on my Mount Rushmore, you have to have done it. You have to have stepped in there and fought in mixed martial arts. Now, it's not Bruce's fault. He just didn't live long enough to see it and never fought in one. I'm sure he would have. But I can't, we can't speculate about how Holmes Gracie would have done in modern mixed martial arts. He died in 1982. Okay, Holmes Gracie Sr. So it's one of those things where like I can't include all these people who won this one time at band camp. You can't do that. They either did or they didn't. No one in the, I'm not going to nominate someone for the Hall of Fame who didn't play in the NFL. I'm just not. They're not going to get into Canton. Sorry. Okay. So it's one of those things to me that you can talk about forerunners and what somebody would have done, but if they didn't do it in mixed martial arts, we just don't have the information to evaluate them. We just don't. And as great as Bruce was, his whole thing was, does it work in the street? And that's great. He didn't believe in the kind of sport that we're seeing now. It wasn't a big part of his philosophy.
I will say one thing that really impressed me in learning about Bruce Lee is how closely guarded he was with who was going to be certified to instruct and the success of the people that he instructed. Think about like Chuck Norris, Joe Louis. I think there was another guy in there, but these guys would basically just win every karate championship in the States.
I'm going to say something really unpopular. Okay. I'm ready for this right now. Bruce Lee, is it a strength or a weakness? He generally liked elite students. He liked students who already knew something. He liked students who already knew what they were doing. When you talked about Chuck Norris and Joe Louis, all those guys were established before they met Bruce Lee. Now, did he make them better? Obviously. Of course he did. Did it elevate their game? Yeah. He didn't like the kind of classes where he took somebody who didn't know a punch or a kick and teach them how to do it. Now, a big part of it, and once again, I'll get into this more next month if you guys tune in. Matthew Polly and I talk about the fact that he died at 32. He was about Bruce Lee and making Bruce Lee better. He didn't live long enough to have that, I want to have a legacy and pass what I know down on to the next generation and really build up my schools. He closed all of his schools before he died. So the caveat I'll make about Bruce as an instructor is he generally taught people who already knew what they were doing. He didn't leave a system where you can, if you sign up for Hickson Gracie's jiu-jitsu class and you don't know a wrist lock from a wristwatch, in the words of Gorilla Monsoon, you'll get pretty good if you show up every day. There's a system that will take somebody from I don't know anything to competent to great as long as you put in the work. One of the things about Bruce's philosophy that makes him difficult, in my opinion, to evaluate is he generally didn't have classes like that. He taught people, small groups of people who already knew what they were doing. He liked kind of an elitist, specialist kind of group. So it's almost the Phil Jackson thing. You know, when I talk about how good is Phil Jackson as a coach, well, he coached teams that could probably get to the NBA Finals with me coaching. He taught the best. So it's hard to evaluate how do you do with a team that isn't that good? To me, that's also the mark of a great coach. And just the way Bruce taught, that's how hard to evaluate. It's very hard to evaluate.
I would agree, but I think we've also got a situation now in many forms of MMA where you don't have, you go into a gym. They have an established black belt there, a noted black belt, if you will, that then almost passes his lineage down, and it almost devalues the whole system to me. So there's a couple gyms that I could go to here, one of which has, and I'm not going to name names, but one of them has a world-renowned professor. I have seen him in that gym maybe twice. What he is elected to do is teach students that he feels are competent now to be black belts under him, and then allow them to teach the students that come in the door. To me, there's something disingenuous about that. If I am paying for your name on the door to say that I train under you, then I should have the capability to train with you. Not at all times, not whenever I want, not every day. I don't need hand instruction. I understand you can pass things down to people, and there are people you're safe with teaching fundamentals. But at the same time, to someone new to the sport, it's very difficult for them to understand the concept of, well, we're going to train at this gym, but we're never going to train with the person whose name is on the door. So to your point, I agree that it is important in a sense that you are willing to work with anyone. But in that same mindset, you also have to have students that can go out and perform to even be able to sell yourself as a competent, whatever you're trying to do, a competent mixed martial arts, karate, it doesn't matter. So I guess in a way, I respect more what he did because, as you said, you don't know how, let's say Chuck Norris, you don't know how Chuck Norris was going to do without his guidance. So it's hard for me to draw that line either way and say, well, did he make Chuck Norris, or was Chuck Norris going to be that good with the proper instruction? You have to look at the common denominator. He took 2 or 3 guys and made them into karate champions. So it's hard for me to say, well, maybe it wasn't all him. Clearly, a majority of it was him and his teaching style, but he also didn't allow himself to water down his teaching to the point where he was, let's be fair. He wasn't wasting time with athletes that weren't going to get to where he wanted them to go. And I'm sure you've been to gyms where there's people that come in and they're way too lackadaisical with their approach, and they're not dedicated to what they're doing. And they basically waste someone's time, whether it's a purple belt or a black belt, because they're not trying to apply themselves 100%. And I'm not saying you go into the gym every day and give 110%. You're not doing that. You're going to break somebody's arm that way. You train in a gym to get better, and then you go out in the world and try to put what you've learned into competitions. But I think there's something to be said for somebody that can get that many people to that high of a level and not be willing to devalue themselves to the point where I'm going to teach Joe Schmo off the street how to do this because that's how good my teaching is.
There are 2 levels to me to every coach. Okay, if you walk in right now to Greg Jackson's, unless you have a name in something else or you have a lot of juice coming out of a different sport, you're not going to get one-on-one time with Greg Jackson and Winklejohn and all these guys, okay? They teach the elite. There was a time when he didn't have that option, when he didn't have a big name and had to teach everybody. There was a time when Rickson Gracie was teaching out of the back of a garage. So they paid their dues teaching people who didn't know anything and getting them to the black belt level. They did. They didn't have a choice. So there was a time when Greg Jackson taught anybody who was willing to listen. And then he got a reputation, started making elite students. Now he can pick and choose. From the beginning, Bruce almost picked and chose. If you read his biography, A Life by Matthew Polly, published in 2018, he liked picking out the ones that had talent and teaching them. it wasn't I'll teach anybody anything. Now, it's whether that's good or bad or ugly, however you want to see it. And also a big caveat, once again, I'll go back to it. He died young. He died before those teaching years. He died before those legacy years where you start thinking about, hey, I want to train someone to pass on what I learned. He never got old enough to do that. Most jiu-jitsu fighters at 32 are worried about themselves and their own performance and winning world titles and whatever. They're not thinking necessarily about making great students. Once those competitive years are over, that's when you start thinking about being a great instructor. Bruce didn't live long enough to do that. So it's a very interesting point, but the idea that he's the father of mixed martial arts, okay, I take that to some degree, but it didn't happen until 20 years after he died. So that gap, if he was a father of mixed martial arts, you imagine something similar would have started earlier, and it really didn't get going until 20 years after he died. So I don't mind him. Obviously, he is an inspiration and to every martial artist, basically, Bruce Lee. That's great. He wouldn't be on my Mount Rushmore simply because he never got a chance to do it himself. It's almost a cruel history that he didn't. But, that's why he wouldn't be, because he never got to compete in it. He never got there. And that sucks. And it's a loss to all of us that basically what we know about Bruce Lee in terms of, his actual combat style is little videos and stories and stuff like that. Everything else, movie magic, we don't believe that stuff. I don't believe Keanu Reeves is an ass kicker, even though I've seen The Matrix. So it's the elements that make us think Bruce Lee was really great. Unfortunately, we don't have the fights we can point to. We have, sparring stuff in Long Beach, his breakthrough performance there, the 1-finger push, 2-finger push-ups and all that stuff. Great stuff. But we didn't get to see him like we would want to see him in an octagon with the gloves on, seeing what he could do on the feet, because I think he would have been phenomenal. But we never got to see it, and that's a tragedy.
We'll have to have a discussion about crossovers like that. Jean-Claude Van Damme, Steven Seagal at a later point. Here is a transition to end all transitions. We were talking about gyms and training. Sadiq Youssef is one of the very few fighters from Maryland. He's actually from Bladensburg. Sadiq, if you hear this, I've reached out to you a couple times, buddy. I would love to come down to your gym. You're not too far from me, but Sadiq is yet to respond. Regardless, I'm sure he's a good guy. I got to meet some of his family at the fight. So all in all, he comes out in a really good position. As you said, kind of this mid-tier card, right? He is the opening fight of the main event, and he fights Morales, who I wanted to call Morales the entire time. I don't know why. Back and forth fight. Not exactly what I expected to happen. I thought Sadiq would come in with a lot more pressure and really do a good job at showing his striking. He actually, in my opinion, relied on a takedown of the third round to kind of seal the fight. It was his biggest fight to date, and I think the important thing is it's going to move him. This is one of the fights, one of the performances that is going to move him with casual fans and also with the UFC. If you look at the numbers, though, he didn't dominate this fight. But if you actually watch it, I think you see a domination, controlling the pace, controlling the range, and when he needed to actually come through, he did that late in the fight.
He fought a mature fight. For fightpicks.com, I made a pick on this one. I thought I picked Youssef. I thought he would knock out Moraes early because I thought he'd come out slinging a little bit more. I thought he'd put on the physical pressure you were talking about, make the octagon small early on in the fight, and he really didn't. It was a measured pace. It was a mature fight. He got the mount in the third round and really unloaded. That's what won it for him. Fought a disciplined, mature fight, and he deserved the decision. I'm glad he got it against Sheymon Rice, who's a tough guy, about the same level he is right now in terms of, where he is in the UFC. This will move him up a little bit, which I think he deserves, but he showed maturity and poise. And like you said, able to get it done when he needed to. You're not going to have the first round knockout every time. You got to fight in a mature manner, moving up the ranks in the UFC, because once you hit those veterans, man, it's hard to put them down. You have to win minutes, win rounds, and then win fights. And I saw that a lot in Youssef in this performance.
I'm glad you used the word maturity, because when you go to the next fight, which was Paul Craig and Kennedy Nzechukwu, this one, listen, this one actually annoyed me to watch.
Don't take me back there.
On paper, you've got this massive reach and height disadvantage for Craig. Now, to his credit, he stayed in the pocket. He took a lot of damage. there was repeated eye pokes in this fight to the point where they finally got to the position where they were going to take a point. Now, there's two things that really annoy me. Number one, if you're talking about Kennedy's standpoint, first and foremost, you were up. You had to have been up on the scorecards going into the third round. You understand that you have this massive gift that not everyone else has with the height and the reach. You've got a smaller man in front of you. You put yourself then in a position where you lose a point in the third round. The entire fight has basically been Craig trying to lure you to the ground where he excels and you trying to prevent that from happening. So why in the world, when you're finally maybe down on the scorecard given the point, are you not doing everything you can to stay on your feet? Set aside the eye gouges and stuff. You know, it's a pro fight. That stuff needs to be way out the window at this point. You can look at this one of two ways. You can look at this as Kennedy did a horrible job at maintaining composure and then was lured into someone else's game plan and lost. Or you can look at this from Craig's standpoint of he came through just about every bit of adversity you could. He persevered through it, stuck with a game plan. And the greatest part is, let me take that back. It's not the greatest part. I think there was a little bit of payback here because he got him on a beautiful rolling triangle, like just a sweeping triangle, and then held that 4 or 5 seconds after a tap. I mean, there was like 7 taps. Part of me thinks he was like, all right, if you're going to keep stabbing my eye, as soon as I get this arm or your neck, I'm not going to let go. You can tap about 10 times before I do. But that is not the fight that I want to see on a main event card out of either one, because it really does reflect poorly as far as the discipline of each fighter.
100,000%. 100,000%. Zekuchu, to me, gave this fight away in terms of Paul Craig was pulling guard, doing everything he could to get the fight to the ground from the first minute of the first round. Okay, what works in the first minute of the first round shouldn't work in the last minute of the last round. You should make adjustments as a professional that tactic isn't going to work. And Paul Craig went back to the well in the last minute of the last round that he went to in the first minute of the first round, and it worked. So you can talk about the guts and heart of Paul Craig, and hey, great, I'm not taking anything away from the guy, but it shouldn't work at that point. Paul Craig didn't come up with anything great. It wasn't a slick takedown out of the blue. It wasn't a slick flying submission out of the blue. The guy got the fight on the ground and locked up a triangle, which he had been trying to do the entire fight. He was just ramming his head against a brick wall, and the brick wall finally collapsed. So I thought Zekuchu, just a horrible performance by him in terms of decision-making and maturity. And, I mean, Paul Craig had one strategy, and it actually worked late. That is crazy. That is absolutely insane. And I thought Zekuchu was going to get his arm broken in the first round, by the way. I thought that was incredible torque on his arm from the armbar from the bottom. You should have learned your lesson by then. And he just didn't. So really disappointing performance by him. Hats off to Paul Craig for his ability to just gut it out and stay with it. He's got a long climb up, though, to be up even anywhere near among the middle of the class in this weight division because it's so competitive. So I don't see either guy. When you talk about a card you need to get off of and you need to really have that water cool moment and you have to move up, Paul Craig got a late finish, but he needs to really refine a lot of his game to be a near a contender.
Yeah, I would agree. I guess just to me, I'm always shocked when you see this play out because it doesn't always work. You know, you've got somebody kind of cruising toward a win and they get lured into a game that is clearly not theirs. And in this case, it was him on the ground. And then, you know, it's like you only give somebody so many opportunities. If you are with someone, if you're rolling with somebody and they're better than you, you're only going to fight them off 3, 4, 5 times before they finally get you. They're going to get you at one point. You're just going to be framed or you're going to get swept. You can only stave off the inevitable when you're actually not at the level they are for so long. So the fact that he kept, and I hate visuals. I hate the visual of it when the one guy is kind of on their back and there's times where they'll be aggressively being pursued and they'll have to do those little knee kicks or the check kicks, you know, to the shin. But then there's other times where, you know, the guy just backs up and stands like, all right, I'm not going to go down there with you. So it really blows my mind that he did this. I mean, it really is when you look at it, if you weren't an educated MMA fan and you were just watching this in passing, you had to look at this fight and be like, what in the world am I seeing here? Because it just visually doesn't tell the right story, right?
Yeah.
But, you know, that's just kind of the way I looked at that. It was too bad. I don't want to go back to Sadiq's fight, but here's the thing. To kick this card off, you don't get two of the most entertaining fights you would expect to see.
Yes. The first two, definitely. I picked early finishes for both of these, and I was wrong on both of them. I thought both of them would get done early. I thought we'd have a big knockout. And also, the way I framed this one, Kennedy had the ability, the range, the power coming off a win on Dana White's Contender Series. It's a guy against a guy who I think was 1-3 in his last 4 fights in the UFC. This was perfectly set up for him to win and look good. And he didn't. This was one of those where you saw the momentum here, and the momentum was towards Zekuchu. And Paul Craig, tough guy, I don't think he was. I think it was loaded in Zekuchu's favor, where they thought Paul Craig's tough, but Zekuchu's got the range, has a knockout power, he's going to finish him. And not only did he lose that opportunity, he didn't get the early finish, he didn't get the win at all. And you don't get handed many of those in the UFC. So big step back for him, and a really disappointing, UFC debut for him all around.
Well, to go from one match of importance for both fighters to another match of critical importance, you look at Michelle Waterson, Karolina Kowalkiewicz. I had to see something by Michelle this time. I really did. I was actually super impressed with what she was able to do on the ground in a fight where, if you look at where they are in the rankings, where they are with common opponents, and where they can go, this is it. If you're gonna build one last run toward a championship, it had to start with this fight here. Now, Michelle, in my opinion, sometimes kind of relies on that karate a little bit too much. This fight was really good for me to see some balance in her, and I think it's a big step in terms of her getting in title contention. I will say, I was a little bit tired, and I've expressed to you before, I am really a little bit tired of seeing this family and children bit. For the most part, there are a lot of fighters in the UFC that want all that kept private. And I'll respect that she wants to be open with her personal life, but at the same time, when you watch the pre-fight vignettes and all it's talking about is her child or her family, it starts to blur the line of what's important. Because clearly, listen, she's been getting a push for the last 4 years from the UFC, and at some point, you have to meet that push with performances, or it doesn't matter. And I think this was going to be one of the fights that if she didn't win, it was going to kind of be the going out. And I guess in that same light, for Karolina, this is a fight where maybe she's going to start to fade back. I don't know that you can rebuild from this with the age and how stacked these divisions are, but this was her fight to lose. She almost allowed Michelle to dominate her. She had an opportunity with someone high-level striking. She's a high-level striker. She should have kept in front of her. She should have kept upright. And if you have to point out a win, then point out a win. This isn't a division where we get a whole lot of, knockouts. And she instead elected to let somebody that's known for their stand-up and their karate to basically make her look pretty amateur on the ground. And I was really surprised by that. I don't know if I was more impressed with Michelle's performance as much as maybe I was disappointed in Karolina.
Kowalkiewicz seemed tentative from the beginning. And I found that surprising. I thought she'd put a little more physical pressure. I thought she'd walk forward against someone known for her karate. Problem is that can be hard to do off the back foot to throw effective kicks, especially if you're always moving backward. Krokop Fedor was a good example of that. But she didn't. She kind of hung out in the mid-range, in the middle ground, where she was easy to hit with kicks. Michelle Waterson hit with a lot of volume with kicks. None of them that were right on target, that had a ton of power, but she just kept throwing them ad nauseum. And Kowalkiewicz didn't seem to have any answer for it. She didn't have any answer for the ground game at all. Almost broke her arm at the end of the second round. That armbar was very, very tight. So Michelle Waterson really owned her. And you can say you're tired of the family bit or whatever story the child storyline that they're pushing. Fans really connected with it. And, that's part of the reason they do it. They can beat certain storylines to death, and trust me, and I've been part of them. But Michelle Waterson winning, people are talking about title shots now, and it's so cute with her kids. Big night for her. But Kowalkiewicz, this was a winnable fight, a very, very winnable fight. and she didn't seize the moment. Michelle Waterson did, and that's what MMA is all about. But great win for her because she moves up. And you're right, the push had been going on for a long time. The problem with a push is you expect results. If you don't get a push, you can kind of stay in that middle range for a long time. But Michelle Waterson had gotten a push, and this was her last chance to, I think, really justify that hype, and she did.
Yeah, I mean, and props to her for doing it. The next fight, we're going to take a look at Josh Emmett, returning from a long layoff, gets a knockout late against Michael Johnson. This was a kind of a labored fight to watch. Even the crowd had soured. DC has now kind of like an infamous gif where he was on his phone when the knockout happened, which, you know, listen, you can't totally blame him, right? It was kind of a stale fight. There wasn't a whole lot of action. And then all of a sudden, Emmett just connects that one power shot, and that's all it takes. Johnson goes, you know, completely stiff and down to the canvas. But to me, I think this is interesting in terms of looking at MMA. So think about being Josh Emmett. You just came back, long layoff. You don't get off to the best start. The judging has been hit or miss. For those that watch the prelims, Ray Borg had one of the most tragedies in scoring I've seen in a very long time. And you're just kind of hoping that the judges are going to see it your way. If you're Michael Johnson, you're thinking, all right, I didn't put the best performance in either, but at least I can kind of grind out a decision here. And then all of a sudden, you go from thinking that to waking up on the canvas, not knowing where you are. And Josh Emmett goes from wondering if he's going to get this decision to having that one clean hit and just let all the emotions pour out. Now, the problem is when you look at what happens to fans, we don't see. I mean, I saw it because I was there. People are checking their phones. People are going to the bathroom. People are deciding to go get those nachos because the fight has not lived up to what you thought it would be. That's okay. If I want to pay $150 to go there and decide that I'm going to stand in the atrium the whole time and not watch any fights, that's my prerogative. And there's no one that should be able to tell me, hey, go to your seat, go watch these fights. You paid good money to be here. Now, as far as Cormier, I don't have any problems with DC. I love DC. I think he's done a great job at transitioning from a fighter to an announcer, maintaining his status as a great fighter, and then kind of being that relative person where, oh, that's one of the best fighters and he commentates, we can learn a lot. For him to be on his phone and it to be shown even during a boring fight, to me, it is a big issue because you're, one, diminishing the sell of the exciting product they have. And two, you're being incredibly disrespectful to the athletes that are in the cage, which, oh, by the way, that's what you do as well. So I would think if anyone on that desk would have the respect for what's happening inside that cage, it would be Cormier. How would he feel if Josh Emmett were a commentator and was on his phone during DC's fight? He would probably take offense to that. He would probably question that. But the fact that not only did it happen, but that the UFC allowed that footage to be cut, to be edited, and to be shown is a little bit crazy. You would think that they would have just looked at it and said, listen, we're not going to show this. Clearly, Cormier's not paying attention. Clearly, he's on his phone. This isn't a good look. We're going to cut to something else. You got a million crowd filler shots. But they chose to show that. And now that they have, in a way, it becomes a little bit as important as the actual
You can't put the genie back in the bottle. And so I'm really surprised they let it out. I was really surprised at that. I honestly was because, I mean, yeah, things do happen. Yeah, I mean, I never do that during a fight. I mean, when I was commentating, in between rounds for sure. You're also engaging with the fans, live tweeting during the commercials and stuff like that. That's all totally normal. During an actual fight, yeah, you want to stay away from that because anything can happen at any time and you'll miss something. Even a 3-man booth, even if you think, Dominic's going to catch it at some point. Now, there's the idea that a camera's always on you. That wasn't necessarily the case in a certain era. The camera wasn't always on you. I am very aware, or was, when I was doing commentary, very aware of the fact that I'm being watched the entire time. Producer can see you. They don't appreciate that, by the way, generally speaking. I've had producers tell other people to get off their phones. You know what I mean? Like, they can see you, and they'll say, get off your phone. Okay, so the idea that the surprising thing to me wasn't necessarily that he was looking at his phone and missed a knockout, but the idea that they then released that footage, that surprised me a lot. Because as you said, there's a million things you could cut to that don't involve missing a knockout. One of the things you're supposed to do as a commentator is communicate enthusiasm. You know, you're telling them to be excited about something you're not excited about.
Yeah, no, that's really, like you said, that's the genie out of the bottle. You're in the time that you most need to be engulfed in that, right? At the time where we can agree it wasn't the best fight. 2 rounds of just kind of like, all right, you know, let's get something going here. Then it justifies itself by seeing him do that. And again, you know, like I said, there's a great story to be told here with Josh Emmett coming back from the injury, naming himself as a contender, getting that kind of overpowering, you know, win at the end when he probably wasn't going to win the fight. There's a lot of things you can look back on, but a lot of times we look back on those things and it overshadows kind of a poor fight. But in this case, I think I was really amazed too when I went back and looked. There were a lot of people that were setting that aside and saying, look what Cormier was doing when this happened. And oh, by the way, you know, you can go back and look at the high def footage of it. There's no 2 ways around it. He tries to play it off. He tries to set the phone down and look over with this stunned look. But you know the stunned look isn't because of what happened in the cage. The crazy look is, oh my God, I was on my phone when that happened, and now people are probably going to look at me and realize. So let me act surprised. Going from that, Jack Hermanson defeats David Branch in 49 seconds. It is so hard for me to take anything away from this fight. Jack had a really nice sweep to get Branch down. He transitioned into a really kind of a cool guillotine where Branch's arm was still left inside, so you've kind of got more room to get that pressure. I think Branch really had no defense for it because he honestly had the clinch so tight from the start, it was over. David Branch, to me, is a guy that came in highly touted. He's now lost 3 of his last 4. His salvation may be the win over Thiago Santos. And that, honestly, depending on his contract status, may be his only hope of getting a re-sign and not a release. Ironically, Hermanson is 3 of his last 4 in wins, and the only losses to Thiago. And this is back in a time where the middleweight division was so stacked. You were having a hard time getting into the top 15 at that point. Now, obviously, Thiago's went to 205, so it becomes a moot point, but it's interesting that they have such, you know, parallel last 4 opponents in terms of losing or winning, except that one common opponent. But I was expecting to see a lot more from David Branch, but it's hard for me to say it wasn't there. I mean, when you really get submitted on the first takedown, you can't look back and take a whole lot into it. The other side of it is we could be thinking about Jack Hermanson having a title shot. And I mean, I'm not saying he doesn't have the credentials to do it, but I do know if someone said that a year ago, there would probably be a lot of questions about how valid.
Yeah, I mean, it was one of those things where what we saw from Hermanson was that the awkwardness of his style. Branch was trying to adjust. I mean, look at it. It was herky-jerky, and Branch was trying to get his timing and figure out what's this guy doing. And the next thing you know, boom, he's on the ground. And that arm-in guillotine is a different version of the arm-in guillotine. A great version of that was Pat Curran versus Shabalat Shamalayev in Bellator. Same kind of guillotine with the arms trapped in there. I like that guillotine a lot. It's almost like an arm triangle guillotine combo because the arm is actually doing the choking. It's a very interesting guillotine, hard to get out of once you're in. Very, very hard. It's one of those that's hard to get into, but once you're into it, man, it's hard to get out. So I don't fault Branch for tapping or not being able to get out of that position. It's extremely difficult to get out of once you're in it. But to your point, Hermanson had the timing for it. He had the awkwardness to get in there. He had the throw to get it on the ground. He did it, the right thing in every position to end the fight like he did. I would say he's at least a couple out of a title shot. Just because it's kind of a monstrous division, so we'll see. But great performance, and David Branch, needs to do something to turn it around, or he's going to get his papers soon. But Hermanson, you got to figure out that awkward stance. He's great on the ground. He's funky. It's hard to time him, and as soon as you make a mistake, you're going to pay for it. And those can be the most difficult opponents ever. Are those funky guys who's fighting kind of a different line and a different pace than everybody else?
I would agree, but I would also say, when you look at validation of that win, if that fight happens 100 times, I don't think that happens.
Him getting
more than
submitted
once.
Happens a lot, and that's what I picked. I picked Hermanson by submission. I think him submitting Branch I see that. I thought he would have more trouble in the opening round with Branch. If you look at the Luke Rockhold fight, this guy can be tough in the opening round. He really can be. And I thought he would be tougher and kind of maybe put Hermanson on his heels in the first 5 minutes or so. Then Hermanson could slow him down, get the takedown, and get it done. I think Hermanson's submission skills and his ability to finish David Branch on the ground, that didn't surprise me at all. The quickness of it surprised me. The way it happened, that surprised me. But Hermanson has serious ground skills. So getting the win by submission, I think he wins most of the time with that strategy.
I expect David Branch, to me, he's a really good first round fighter. And I mean, like you said, he showed even in fights he's lost, right? He showed it against Luke Rockhold. In a big reason he beat Thiago Santos is he came right out, was aggressive, pushed the pace against Santos. And listen, not many people are going to stand there and push the pace with Santos and get him out. So a lot of the things that favor David Branch never even got to get started. So that's why it's so difficult for me to put a lot into this. But then again, you look at the numbers and it's like, man, David Branch is setting himself up as not being a UFC caliber fighter. And that's concerning when you look at, coming from places like the World Series of Fighting. To transition that in, you've got Justin Gaethje and Edson Barboza. Now, Gaethje did come from the World Series of Fighting as well. To me, is a high-level striker. So is Edson Barboza. Edson Barboza may be top 5, in my opinion, well-rounded strikers in the UFC. But when you want to say, this is what I expect to see in a fight, Justin Gaethje is going to give you that. This fight started with all leg kicks, just what we would expect. And then Gaethje started to put that pressure on, caught Edson going backwards, and I mean, just caught him with a highlight knockout like you wouldn't have seen. And it's always crazy for me to see that happen. So if you're there, you've kind of lulled through this card, and then now we've got Josh Emmett gets that, literally knocks Michael Johnson stiff, goes down, can't even break his fall. Hermanson stuns Branch less than a minute in with a guillotine. And then now you've got Justin Gaethje after this couple-minute firefight, just starches Barboza, and he does the same thing, just collapses. I mean, it was almost so fast, you didn't know what actually set it up and what connected. And then afterwards, Justin Gaethje just does what Justin Gaethje does. I mean, he goes up, does the backflip, which I'm surprised. I really am, because if you remember, this was a problem. World Series of Fighting, I believe, actually suspended him for this. I'm all for celebrations. I have a problem, theoretically, when someone is knocked out, when you have medical teams coming into the cage, and you are doing a backflip off that cage, which is one, moving the canvas that somebody's already unconscious on, and two, not really expected by anyone else in the cage, regardless of where you think you're going to be landing. So I'm a little bit surprised the UFC hasn't stepped in and said, listen, you can do that, but do that after your post-fight interview. Don't do it while we're trying to tend to someone medically or when someone should maybe not have the canvas being shook underneath.
Did a backflip in Bellator and landed on one of our camera women and hurt her bad. Bad. Like disabled bad. Landed right on her. So I've seen it happen. I've seen, people are going into the cage and they don't know someone's going to backflip. Or you're climbing the cage and she was trying to get the shot and going in behind him and he backflipped off of it and hit her. So yeah, I've seen it go bad. It shouldn't be happening. There should be rules about, okay, don't do it right when we're, especially like you said, when someone's knocked out, medical crews coming in, they might have to stretcher somebody. They might have to do CPR right there, depending on how bad it is. Yeah, that's something that should definitely be saved until after the interview. And I would be happy to see that happen. The fight itself, it almost seemed like Edson Barboza having effective leg kicks worked against him. You almost saw Justin Gaethje go, oh, screw this, man. He's going to kick my leg out from me. I got to finish this. There was almost a sense of urgency. I mean, Gaethje fights aggressively anyway. It's just his personality. But as soon as he started eating those leg kicks, it was like, dude, I got to get this over with. He closed distance and creamed him. And I thought Justin Gaethje would win by knockout. I thought it would be a little bit later. But his ability against James Vick, who's tall, rangy, wanted to keep him at a distance. Justin Gaethje's ability to make the octagon small and close distance when he needs to is really incredible. Of course, he has power, but a lot of guys have power. His ability to get in range when he needs, when he needs to, against very tough, rangy opponents who throw great leg kicks and have their own stand-up abilities. That's what's special. He can get in range to throw some heat, man. And when he does, he can finish anybody. Now, the two questions I have moving forward are, A, how's he going to do against someone who doesn't stand and bang with him? First off, how's he going to do against a wrestler submission person who's not going to stand there and engage with him in this way? He's been fed basically strikers so far, and he's looked great. Certainly exciting, even when he's lost. The second thing is when the tide starts turning, because he eats a lot of damage in every fight. And that does not make for a long career. That makes for a very steep cliff when things start going wrong. So those are my two questions. Will he, A, be successful against someone who doesn't want to stand there and bang? And B, will his style, in terms of the amount of damage he takes, catch up to him before he gets that title shot?
Well, I mean, obviously, it was interesting in the post-fight that he talked about Cerrone kind of jumping up in front of him as far as the rank. I don't want to say the rankings, but in getting ranked opponents. I don't want to say that he completely called out Khabib in the most direct way, but he definitely let it be known that he has what he feels is a solution. And I can't totally take that from him, because here's the thing. I would imagine, as a D1 All-American, he is a very good wrestler. Will he have a takedown defense that will neutralize Khabib? I don't know. It could. We haven't seen it. If you didn't look at his ears,
you wouldn't even know he never stepped on
Justin Gaethje was
from the way he fights. Yeah.
So when you look at, I hate to bring up MMA math, I hate to bring up common opponents, but if you think about it this way, Edson had a fight with Khabib that you really would have felt could have stopped, right? So Justin knows, hey, listen, I have to go in there, I have to make an example out of this. If he's going to maul him and make it look rough against a striker, I have to go in and make a statement and say, okay, I'm that much better than Edson Barboza striking. And to me, he did that. He made that case. As you said, the question becomes what happens next, and what happens when plan A doesn't work, because we've never seen plan A not work with Justin Gaethje. He's actually had his plan end by getting knocked out or getting stopped. He's never had someone willing to say, okay, I'm done in the way he did. Like you said, I'm done with these leg kicks. It's time to go. I'm just gonna come forward until I knock you out or you knock me out. And honestly, it could have went either way. I mean, this fight, I think 100. Just we talked about with Hermanson and David Branch. This fight goes 100 times. I don't see it going beyond round 3. 100 times.
Ever. Yeah,
it's just not the way these two fight. Gaethje is not going to push it to the mat. Khabib is going to be the one pushes to the mat, and that's where I would just think Khabib would have the upper hand, only because I don't have any real reference. I know that Gaethje used to wrestle with GSP, like I heard those stories, but okay, GSP and Khabib are two eras apart. So it really is going to be interesting if they give him that opportunity, because you have to wonder that fight is going to be dictated. I guess even the best way to look at it, Gaethje lets the fight be dictated by someone else. If you're willing to stand and trade, he'll stand in there and trade till he gets knocked out. What's going to happen when somebody doesn't have that mindset and says, okay, I'm not going to stand here and take your firefight. I'm going to get you to the ground. He may have a really good defense against, somebody trying to get a single or double leg, but is he going to be able to defend it 20 times in a 5-round fight? Eventually, just like we talked about before, going back to Paul Craig's fight, eventually you keep trying something, you may get it to work. And in this level, all you need is something to work once. And that's going to be what ends the fight. I don't know if Justin Gaethje has that in him to not get frustrated when those kicks and strikings don't work. Come on, man. These fights are a little rough. Whenever you put, 5 against 6 or 6 against 7 or 7 against 8, it's hard to jump big. It's more of a loss for Barboza than a win for Gaethje. And it could have easily went the other way. You just can't really rise a whole bunch when you're fighting the guy that's one rung behind you.
I think his knockouts, he leaps pretty far simply because the fans just love his style. Now, my question that we will have to see played out is, will the UFC go, look, we got a great brawler here. Let's throw him against some great brawlers and just set the fans up for these ad nauseum. Are we going to waste, in a sense, air quotes here, waste his talents against Khabib, who's not going to probably stand there and bang with him? Is that not an aesthetic fight? Will that be a waste of Justin Gaethje's talents when there are 7 entertaining fights with other strikers? right now in that division at 155, which is a Shark Tank. Him versus, and even about, Anthony Pettis going back down to 45. Take my money. I want to watch that fight. Take my money, please. I mean, there are a million guys Justin Gaethje can fight at 55 that'll be incredibly entertaining. Khabib is probably his least entertaining fight by a damn sight, by a lot. I'm going to come up with a kind of an obscure quote. The IRA tried to blow up Margaret Thatcher in the 80s, and their statement was to Margaret Thatcher, "You have to get lucky every day. We only have to get lucky once." That's wrestling Khabib. You have to stop 50 takedowns. I only need to finish one. And once I'm on you, it's like, a quilt full of iron rocks laying on top of you, crushing the spirit and the life out of you. And we haven't seen Justin Gaethje fight or win that kind of fight. So that's the question everybody has moving forward. I think there are a couple more entertaining fights you want to give him before you give him someone who has the potential to negate his style. Him versus Cowboy, take my money. Paul Felder, take my money. I mean, name somebody. Ferguson, Pettis, blah, blah, anybody. It's going to be entertaining with Justin Gaethje. I'll pay for it. I'll pay for it. Put it on pay-per-view. I'll pay for it. So it's the idea of, you want to give him those aesthetically pleasing fights until it's, okay, he has to get a title shot. He has to fight somebody who stylistically who will ask those uncomfortable questions. No. People are calling him the Arturo Gatti of MMA. And that is both, in my experience, and remember I used to call boxing, I love the sport of boxing. It's both a compliment and an insult. Arturo Gatti was amazing to watch. One of the most entertaining fighters of all time. Against elite competition, the dude looked terrible. And I love Arturo Gatti. But if you saw Gatti Mayweather, that was like, oh my God, it was awful. If you saw Gatti De La Hoya, oh my God, that's awful. When he fought those next level guys, it was just so clear he wasn't on that level. The greatest trilogy of all time in boxing, well, first it's Ali Frazier. But for entertainment value, probably Ward Gotti. Ward was a journeyman. Okay? Ward was a tough Irish kid, and they had one of the greatest trilogies of all time. Probably the greatest single fight of all time, although I still think Throw Manila is the greatest fight of all time. Arturo Gatti had amazing fights against guys who weren't that good. As soon as you went into that next level, he was lost. Gatti just didn't have those skills for that division at that time at the elite level. So that's the amount Justin Gaethje. Is he the Arturo Gatti of MMA as a positive, and that he goes to war and I want to see him fight every time? Or is he the Arturo Gatti of MMA in a negative, in that, man, he looks great at this medium level, at this fringe contender level. He's fantastic. You put him against the elite of the elite, and he doesn't have what it takes.
The great thing about Gatti and Ward that you really don't see get repeated anymore is they fought in succession, essentially. They fought, I guess it would have been at that point, 30 rounds in the course of like 18 months, 16 months, something crazy like that. We would never dream of seeing MMA like that, right? You would never think, well, John Jones and Cormier are going to fight, but they're going to do it 3 times within a 14-month span. It just doesn't work that way. Another big difference between, boxing and MMA, I think, in my opinion, is the way they structure those things and the way they can build and sell those things. Not to say that we don't get, second fights, but think back Jacare Brunson too. I mean, they happen so far apart. It's almost like the first fight becomes irrelevant. With Gatti and Ward, those fights were extremely relevant going back and providing learning opportunities and coaching moments to create better and better and better performances. And in that case, I think you're seeing a better and better and better fight every time. But MMA draws the line in a totally different way, that it just does not set itself up to be, one, conducive to that. I don't want to see Justin Gaethje and Edson Barboza fight 2 more times. There'd be nothing to prove. And like you said, kind of in a way, you worry about the collateral damage. Justin Gaethje has a fighting style that is indicative of a short career. No 2 ways around it. I would hope that he would agree, because he's fighting that way. So if he thinks this is going to be his ticket to fight till he's 50, hopefully he's reevaluating. People we've seen it, sadly. People get punch drunk. People have problems. Your body is not meant to absorb hits like that.
Certainly was.
He is able, and he was stunned in that fight too. To me, I definitely saw him get stunned. It just happened that he bit down on the mouthpiece one more time, came back after Edson, and got him. You're not always going to have that. He didn't have that happen against Eddie Alvarez. And to me, that was another brawl. Like, you only have a couple of those left. There's only a couple fighters in the UFC like that. And Gaethje is definitely one of them. It's exciting to watch, but as you said, the issue becomes, are they willing to set aside that cash cow where you put them a guy on a marquee, people are going to pay, people are going to show, for the sake of saying, okay, well, now we're going to put up against the greatest right now in Khabib and see what happens. I know one thing, if Justin Gaethje could beat Khabib, that would be an incredible moment for him, and certainly would not be someone a lot of people want to fight. Because you look at whoever does actually dethrone Khabib right now, which in my opinion is the best Khabib there is, they're going to have an awful high regard put on their name. And I don't know, honestly, that Khabib striking is as good as Gaethje's. I definitely don't think Khabib has that power, though. It maybe power is the wrong term, because like you said, everybody has power. Gaethje has some precision and has some really strange angles he catches guys at.
In the striking category, he's better than Khabib. But Khabib's good enough to walk through the fire, to trade when he needs to get the takedown. And that's the important thing moving forward in that fight. And, who knows if that's on the horizon. I would say Justin Gaethje needs one more. I think he needs to fight a top 3, top 4 guy right now. If he beats them, he's right in that conversation. But the problem with Justin Gaethje's style is it's almost always a coin flip. There are always moments in every fight he has where you go, that he wins, where you go, God, he could have lost. There's a moment in every fight that he's won where he could have lost. There's a moment in every fight he's lost where he could have won. There's always that coin flip with him. He has to win, I'd say, 1 or 2 more coin flips and he fights for the title. With his style, that's asking a lot. That's asking a lot. He's not a defensive wizard. Okay. So can he get through those 2 more coin flips, 1 or 2 more coin flips to get to the title? We'll see.
We will see. So with that said, we're going to go ahead and wrap this up. We appreciate you guys taking a listen to this. We're also working on pretty much anywhere you can find a podcast. If you guys have something specific you want to see or a platform you need it on, just reach out to Jimmy on Twitter and I will do my best to get it working. Again, appreciate you guys listening to this, and we will be back very shortly with more commentary.